Stephen Robert Alten was born August 21, 1959 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's an American science fiction author. He is best known for his Meg series of novels set around the fictitious survival of the megalodon, a giant prehistoric shark. After earning his bachelor degree in physical education at Penn State University, a master's degree in sports medicine from the University of Delaware, and a doctorate of education at Temple University, Steve decided to pen his debut novel Meg, a novel of deep terror, to the help support of his struggling family of five. He even sold his '71 Malibu convertible to pay for his editing fees. 4 days after losing his day job, Steve was offered a two-book, seven-figure deal with Bantam Doubleday, and Meg went on to crowded the book of the 1996 Frankfurt Book Fair and was eventually sold to more than 20 centuries. The book became the bestseller in the US and a successful radio series in Japan, has spawned a cult following amongst his readers, with 6 sequels to date, as well as being adapted into a Hollywood movie. Released in the summer of 2018, The Meg was a blockbuster smash hit worldwide. To date, Steven has written 21 books, including the Mayan trilogy, the 2012 Doomsday Trilogy, and the Locke series. He also helped launch the non-profit Adopt an Author program, designed to encourage students to read, or which has seen 10,000 teachers registered so far. I am Daniel Lucas.
And I'm Chris Techoblay. Welcome to Book 101.
Yes, because Book 101 is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Stephen Alten.
Yes, definitely. I'd say one of the best. It's one of my favourites, really. It'd be another fun one to talk about. I don't know if it's an author that a lot of people will be sort of wholly familiar with everything he's done. So, we'll touch on one of the more famous ones that they may know him from, but there's a lot more to delve into as well. So, yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. So I first discovered his work. So the first book of his I discovered is one called The Mayan Prophecy, which if anyone's listened to me talk about my the inspirations behind my Wildemore Apocalypse, you'll know that the whole 2012 Mayan prophecy was a big interest of mine. So we're going back to probably when I started writing, so 2012, 2013. I found this book because I was researching the Mayans and that, and obviously having a novel out there called exactly what I was looking for would have drawn my attention. So that was the first book I read of his, but it's another series of his has played a bigger part in my life, really, which is one that if anyone knows him, they know him for probably more so than the Mayan books, which was the Meg series, which I first started reading. God, let me think, 2018. So there was a bit of a gap in between when I discovered him and when I then found the ones that really hooked me in. So it was a bit of I wouldn't say a slow burner. It was one of those writers that I discovered through one means, and then I didn't actually realize until a little while later sort of everything else that he had done and what other awesome works he had done, particularly the Meg series, as we'll talk about.
So as a reader, what first drew you to Steve Alten's work?
So, I mean, obviously, apart from the obvious, then, when I say about I discovered him through the Mayan prophecy, which the title itself was what drew me in. I think it was he's described as a sci-fi writer, and I don't normally go for science fiction. I think up to that point, I was expecting, any kind of sci-fi book was set in space, other planets, that kind of thing. It wasn't really my bag. But I think what Steve Alten does is he takes. There's a lot of history in his works, as you'll find with the Mind Prophecy is obviously based on, that very, as the name suggests, the Mayan calendar that foretold the end of the world, essentially, as most people will have interpreted it as in 2012. So that's something historical there, that he developed this a bit like I did, I suppose, his theory behind what could have happened, what this end of days actually would look like, according to him. It wasn't really, there wasn't really anything in that made me think it was science fiction. That to me was almost like historical fiction, speculative fiction. I don't know what you'd class it as. He has a knack of really hooking you in. Some of his books are quite big, which normally would put me off. I like something that I'm not a very fast reader, so I like something that I know I can digest fairly quickly. But he's got a way of really hooking you into the story, and in his stories go down several paths that you wouldn't have predicted, but all the time winding back to the topic of the story. He developed a trilogy out of the Mayan Prophecy. I haven't read the other two, I will admit, but sort of come the end, you get to the end of his books and you realize you've been on this roller coaster ride with so many twists and turns that you weren't expecting, but actually you reach a conclusion at the end that you're happy with, which I think is really important as a reader. He doesn't leave you hanging or leave you questioning what is going on. It's very, very clear what he's done at the end. He reaches a conclusion as if he was to leave that book alone and not write another one, it would still stand on its own, I feel. Something I liked to try and do in my writing, but I found, to my detriment, I couldn't really write an ending very well. Especially if I had an idea that I could carry the story on, I liked a cliffhanger. Which I think Steve Alten, he has cliffhangers throughout his story books, but he doesn't necessarily leave you unsatisfied at the end.
Yes, these are the title of the Mayan trilogy: Domain, or the Mayan Prophecy in 2001, Resurrection, or the Mayan Resurrection in 2004, and Phobos, Mayan Fear, or the Mayan Destiny in 2009. So those trilogy impacted you to your Wildemar Apocalypse trilogy?
Yeah, it was definitely within, it was definitely something I credit. Yeah. I mean, there was other films around the 2012 film at the time that was around about 2010, I think it was released. And I was reading some actual, obviously not factual books on the 2012 prophecy, but ones that, non-fiction ones that people had written. I was taking in all of these different theories around it, and I think what's great hearing when Steve Alten actually wrote those books, it's prior to 2012, so to him it was almost like it gave him an idea of what could happen. I think that's what makes it more exciting, especially if you were reading them at that time, because you're still, if you were sort of a believer in the whole Mayan prophecy, you may have been speculating what is going to happen, and this was just one of his trilogy. Would have made up one of many interesting theories, I suppose, and it fed people's imaginations. So, but yeah, it was definitely there. It definitely made me want to write my own version. Even though I wrote mine after 2012, it still made me want to write my own take on it. So yeah, it's very inspirational.
As a writer, what impact has Steve's work had on your own?
So again, just to follow on from that, really. So that book was one that spurred me to writing my own take on an apocalypse, the 2012 apocalypse. So that's a very obvious impact. But if we go a little bit more recent, when I said I discovered his Meg series in 2018, I don't mind sharing actually that I discovered that book at quite a dark time in my life. I was diagnosed with social anxiety and depression in 2013. I started writing, oddly enough, and it reached a head in 2018. to such a degree that I had to step away from my work and everything. I kind of felt like I was retreating. And the one thing I discovered when I eventually made that move to come away from my job and try to, correct myself, I found the Meg, or Meg as it was known. I wanted to delve into a book. I wanted to escape my own reality, and I'd known about the book Meg for a while. I was a big fan of monster books, monster movies like Jaws. Peter Benchley was a great writer who gave us Jaws and The Beast. I loved those TV adaptations, movie adaptations, and the books that they came from. So I wanted to get into reading more of those kind of things. And when I knew that, when I found Meg again, I discovered it through another writer friend of mine called Dave McCaffrey, who was actually he was the publisher of My Wildemore Apocalypse most recently a few years ago. He actually was he partook in the mentorship program that Steve Alten was running. So he would pick writers and he would mentor them, I think over a course of a year or so, to write a book. And Dave McCaffrey, actually, his debut novel went through the hands of Steve Alten. He was one of the ones who had a lot to do with shaping the story. So when I was talking to, I think I was seeing David, or I was talking to David at the time about certain things about writing, and this came up, and so I thought, what better time? I need something to really distract me. So I found Meg, and I was totally hooked. I knew the film. I think I knew they were making it into a film as well. So I found myself. It's the first time that I rattled through books that quickly. I read the entire Meg series in about 2 months. So I think it was 6 books, and I couldn't put them down. I wanted. It gave me, yes, a distraction from my own problems, I suppose, but it almost had a really soothing effect in that respect. I wasn't thinking about the things that I was worrying about before. So for me, coming out of that period, I'd found a writer which not only had written books I'd enjoyed, but they all of a sudden meant a lot more to me personally. And again, I knew I tried my hand at writing some of these monster books. My story, which is in A Necessary End, is the closest thing I've come to writing something like this. It's still something I want to do. I want to write a book, even if it's just one book, a standalone one, which has the impact that Steve Alten's Meg had on me. Giving someone somewhere they can escape to if they need to, and sort of hold them there, and make them want to just not put the book down or keep picking the other volumes up or whatever. And what he does is he makes himself very accessible to his readers. He actually puts his email address out, but you can actually contact him. It may take him a while to come back to you, but he likes that exchange with his readers. He's very sort of gives it a real personal kind of quality. So after after the couple of months where I devoured his Meg series, I emailed him. Sort of cited the common link we had with Dave McCaffrey. It was good that I could drop a familiar name in there, and I actually had a response. I had only a very brief email exchange with Steve myself, which was amazing for me, because this was a guy who had such an impact on me personally, and I loved his work. And all of a sudden I could actually, before I had my own podcast, it was the first time that I'd actually been able to sort of reach out and have a response from someone that I admired. So I think that's fantastic that he does that, and he makes no secret that he likes that connection with his readers. It's very easy to forget about the people that get you where you are, I think.
Yes, definitely. So if you compare Meg to Joe, what's a big difference?
Well, the big difference, pardon the pun, is obviously the size of the shark. So in Jaws, obviously you're dealing with a very big shark with the great white, but it's very much set in reality. The Meg is as well. The glaringly obvious difference with this one is you're dealing with a megalodon, which firstly is a much, much bigger beast, but also one that we think anyway, unless we find out otherwise, no longer exists. It's a prehistoric creature which unfortunately we believe to be extinct. It's a terrifying thought when you consider the carnage, the horror that Peter Benchley brought us with Jaws, to fear a creature which is actually out there, and then you take Steve Alten, who really ups the ante with that, and is like taking a 60-foot great white shark, and imagine what that can do when you know already what a normal one can do. I think Steve Alten just takes it that step further, and he indulges the historical aspect of it. Or the prehistorical aspect, I should say, because it doesn't just stop at the megalodon. He introduces other prehistoric creatures along with it, and he's able to actually make them fit into this world that he's created. It's set in a normal world. It's not some faraway planet or anything like that. He's imagining, like he does with a lot of his books, what would happen if. So what would happen if we discovered the megalodon actually found its way back? What would happen? What absolute carnage could ensue? And what else could come with it? There's prehistoric whales he brings in there. He's done a spin-off called The Loch, which is about Loch Ness Monster. He's able to put his mind to these other creatures, these cryptids, as they call them. These creatures which are either mythical, legendary, prehistoric, and he's able to actually make them fit. Not saying that Pete Benchley couldn't do that with Jaws, but I think Jaws was very much set in a much more sort of, dare I say, everyday situation. These shark attacks do happen, like they do in Jaws. Maybe not to the extreme sometimes, as he put it into his books, but to my knowledge, there haven't been any megalodon attacks as yet.
Yes.
But it really does make you think, what could happen. And this is the thoughts he's left me with his Mayan prophecy. But he's also, I'll have to get the title of it. There's another great one. I think I don't know if it's Undisclosed, I think, is another one of his, which is around kind of more the conspiracy cover-up of extraterrestrials. And it's almost like he's asking questions with all of these. We don't have any proof they don't exist. So what if they do? And I think that's a fantastic thing to go into writing and reading a book.
Yes, definitely. So these are the titles of the Meg series. Number 1, Meg, a novel of a deep terror in 1997, and it was revised and expanded edition published by Shonobi Book in 2005. And number 2, The Trance, or The Trance Meg 2 in 1999, Meg Primal Waters in 2004, Meg Hill's Aquaman 2009, Meg Origin in 2011, Meg Night Stalkers in 2016, Meg Generation in 2018, and Meg Purgatory in 2022. So Mr. Alten is a prolific writer.
He is. He's teasing us with Meg Purgatory as well. It was meant to be out last year, but we are eagerly still awaiting it. He does this. He has his own health issues of his own, bless him, as well, which is, I think, impacting his writing. But he's great at telling us what he's working on and making us want it already before it's even there. I'm just waiting for the day it becomes available, because I'll be there. So,
what is the different about his writing that set him apart from others you have been read?
I guess just what I said before, following on from that, what I said about, it's just that quality of what he writes about. He's able to, yes, most would describe him as a science fiction writer. I don't think you can categorize what he does, to be honest, because part of it is historical. The science fiction part, I think the only bit of it really that I've seen is just he's writing about stuff that you can neither prove or disprove. So it's not like you're not picking his books up thinking this is so far out the realms of reality. It's great for that reason, because I can just suspend all kind of belief system. Or like me, you want to pick ones up that really make you think and make you wonder, this guy could be onto something if what he's writing about could actually happen or could actually exist. And it's the way that he is able to build this universe, like he's done with Meg, for example, and all of directions he's taken it, all of the other creatures that he's been able to bring into them and make them fit. And the spin-offs that he's had, The Lock is one. That's got 2 books. We're waiting on the sequel. And there's another one called Vostok, which is more where the prehistoric sperm whale comes into it. He's able to take parts of his universe and break them open in other books, but make sure they feed into the main narrative of what the Meg series is telling. I think he's just so immersive. And I'm not saying there's other writers out there that aren't, but I think he's one of the ones, unlike what I said about James Herbert, and I think I found this with Wilbur Smith as well. He doesn't have a particular blueprint to his books. I haven't sat through any of the Meg books, for example, and thought, I know where this is going, because he's following a certain pattern. I didn't get that at all. And particularly in, I think it was Vostok, actually, he went completely away from what I thought he would do. The science fiction aspect really came out because he had a bit of kind of almost like time travel, but deja vu kind of thing, where characters were having to repeat the same scenario time and time again until they found a way of breaking the cycle and changing, going off on a certain path. That really was, it took me by surprise, because I almost felt like he had taken it way past reality, even though his book is already not based completely in reality, because it's about prehistoric sea creatures which may or may not exist. But I felt like I was being taken on another journey within that book, and then being placed right back where I started. I'd say immersive is one of the best words I can probably use to describe his work and why it appeals to me.
So do you think what Mr. Alten inspiration of writing all those Meg series?
What was his inspiration? Do you mean?
Yes, because
wow,
8 series, right? It's like,
I know. Yeah, I mean, it's from the first one, you really you get a sense. It's one of those where you get a sense of he didn't need to do a sequel, but there was definitely scope to do it, and he did run with it. I think by the time you've written one book about the megalodon, it's almost like the world's your oyster, so to speak. It's like you can expand on this because it's not based on a particular event. You've taken something historical, you've brought it into the modern world. It's up to you what you do with it. What his actual inspiration was, I don't know. I just love the way that in the second book, for example, no spoiler alert here really, because I think a lot of people may already be familiar with it, but he brings in the original megalodon from the first book, spawns a couple of babies. So it's almost like you can see the bloodline already starting to form. You know that this is potentially a series which is going to have legs or fins, so to speak, and just go on. And then he introduces he expands the main character, Jonas Taylor. He brings in his son. So it's all the time, I think, he's pulling in almost like bit players from the early books, and he's giving them their own platform in later books. So he's expanding, he's going through the timeline of all the characters, and he's making sure they all have their part, I suppose. And the more characters he brings in, again, something else he does for his readers as well is he'll have competitions going, or like lucky draws, where he'll actually name and create characters after his readers. He'll use their names, or he'll use their appearance or whatever. So he's always got so many characters he's bringing into these books that, again, he could just sit back and just decide, well, I'm going to take those two over there in the next book. They're going to come, front and center, and they're going to have their own story to tell. And I think as long as he's doing that, he's got a believable universe that he could just keep expanding. So,
Yes, definitely. So if you like Sir Alten immersiveness of writing, what do you think the flaws of the writing?
The actual writing itself of the books, I'm really not sure, because I've got such a place in my heart for the Meg series for reasons I've discussed. I suppose what I've just said about the fact that he could go on and keep expanding this universe, I suppose the danger there is the fact that he doesn't know when to stop, and all of a sudden you've watered down the product too much. When are there enough parts to a series that you can then leave it alone? and the way he teases us with the books as well. If I'm going to pick out any flaw that if he's got any chance of hearing it, this is a good flaw to have. Is the fact that he does get us wanting his books way before they're probably due to land with us. So we are almost like rabid by the time he actually releases them. So the wait in between books can seem a bit too much at the time, but when you see what he's doing and the reasons for it, I suppose you can forgive him for that, absolutely. But the writing, if I'm going to base it on the ones I've read anyway, there isn't really anything in the actual terms of the stories and that. I think possibly going back to Vostok, the bit in there which went completely off course and almost had a bit of a element to it, that might be, if anything, I'd say that didn't really, for me, it didn't really fit. It went too far beyond the purpose of the story he was trying to tell. So there is that danger there. I think if he doesn't quite shut off his brain, and it, a bit like me, goes off in all kinds of directions, it's when do you choose to stop? So yeah, there you go.
So the Meg series, the first film adaptation of Meg novel A Deep Terror was came to motion picture last August 10, 2018. And the Meg 2, The Trance, is scheduled to be released August 4, 2023.
Yes. Can't wait. 5 years is a long time. Again, this is nothing to do with Steve Alten. This isn't him slowing the process down, but it's almost like waiting for another one of his books to come. It's a long time to wait. But it's building that anticipation. I think that's all they're doing.
So for all the Meg series, what do you think the best of the best? All of them.
That's a really easy one. As much as I love the series as a whole, there was a clear front runner for me, which is Meg, Hell's Aquarium, which is book number 4. It's absolutely fantastic. This is the one where I think he had introduced, so Jonas Taylor, the main character, his son David, I think had been introduced in previous books. But this is the one where he's come of an age, and he's the main character. So he's the one doing almost, in the main role in the firing line as far as these aquatic monsters are concerned. The story is fantastic. In a nutshell, I think again, a while since I've read it, but David Taylor is given an opportunity by some billionaire out there who wants to open an aquarium, essentially, of prehistoric sea creatures. He's found out the megalodon exists. He's trying to get his hands on more. He knows where to find them. So he enlists David Taylor to come along in his father's shoes and basically help him capture a lot of these creatures that he wants. And this is where this goes beyond just the megalodon. This is where a lot of the great ones from, Jurassic periods, Triassic, whichever one it is, you got so many interesting creatures they bring into this. One in particular, which really is instrumental in one of the most heart-wrenching ends to a book, and one of those real curveball kind of twists that you didn't see coming. This is definitely the one to read. You probably need to read, I would say you can't really successfully read the Meg books out of sync. It always does go better if you read them in order. So if you can get through the first 3 books, which are all brilliant, and get to Hell's Aquarium, you won't regret it. That's the one that I really hope they get to make into a film one day as well. Yes.
So how did Mr. Alten connect all the series in the story?
So obviously the megalodon is the main thread through them all. It starts off in the first book where the megalodon is discovered. It's obviously a creature that people think is long gone. Something happens and it's able to surface from the bottom of the Mariana Trench and actually into normal surface waters, as it were. And from there, like I mentioned, there's offspring that come from that original megalodon, which then they kind of take over the story over the most of the series, mainly like the 2 daughters that the original megalodon had, and it's really sort of how Jonas Taylor and his group of friends who discovered them are trying to contain not that you contain a megalodon very easily, but it's how they're trying to cope with the fact that this creature is once again around, and it can't be just left to run amok in the oceans. It needs containing somehow, otherwise, there'd be no people left, essentially. So yeah, I mean, that carries through. This is where, a bit like Hell's Aquarium, where the megalodon story is always going forward and always evolving, but he's bringing in other of these prehistoric sea creatures who would have been around not only at the time of the megalodon, but all the way through history, finding some way of bringing them in and making them relevant. And it's coming up to the last book they released was Generations. They left it on a massive cliffhanger. So here I was saying that he doesn't leave you with an unsatisfied taste in your mouth. He doesn't really do cliffhangers. Generations does end on a bit of a cliffhanger. And I think the idea was he was meant to write and release Purgatory a lot sooner than he has done. But it's the only book so far I think it's seen. So it's I don't want to give too much away because I really want people out there who will have already read it will know what I'm on about. But those who haven't, I encourage you to go through the series until you get to that point, and you'll know what I mean. But there's something else coming through that he's not written about before, another creature, and he's introduced it pretty much right at the end. And you just want to know now. It's almost like the megalodon throughout the series has gone from being the villain to almost, I don't want to dumb it down by saying he's almost like a pet, or she's almost like a pet of the Jonas Taylor family, but they've almost like got a bond by this point with the megalodon, and you just get you get the impression that the megalodon is almost going to come good and be the savior at this point, but you've got to wait till the last book to find out, which is really annoying.
Probably bigger, better than the Meg.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah. It's has the makings of a very, very cool ending. There's rumors that he is making Purgatory the last one. We'll see, obviously, if that is the case. But if it is, it would do an explosive ending, really, I would imagine.
Yes, and these are the standalone novel of Mr. Alten. Fathom in 1998, Goliath in 2002, The Shell Game in 2007, Grim Reaper End of Days in 2010, The Omega Project in 2013, and Sharkman in 2014, and Mr. Tetrablade saying Undisclosed in 2017. Mr. Chris, let's go back to your Mayan trilogy so that we can promote your Voldemort Apocalypse.
There you go. You always find a way.
So how did you craft the Voldemort Apocalypse trilogy through the Mayan trilogy?
So again, Steve Alten's Mayan trilogy, it didn't play a part as a whole thing, I suppose. I've only read the first book, but the first book was enough for me to get my imagination going and say, okay, this is his take on what could happen in the 2012 apocalypse that was meant to be. So at the time I read that, I was like, okay, so even though that time's been and gone, what is my take on what possibly did happen, or possibly could have happened, but would explain why we're still here, kind of thing. So I sort of took part of the idea, I suppose, that Steve Alten took, which is the Mayan calendar, the prophecy that the world would end in 21st of December 2012. So many books out there and movies as well have been written and created around this idea. I think it has really died off a little bit afterwards. I guess when people looked at it like me and sort of think, well, we're still here, so it obviously didn't happen. What I wanted to address then is, okay, how can we explain that we are still here? Maybe something did happen on that date, but because it didn't happen in front of us all, we think we're blissfully carrying on like nothing, nothing's different. Actually, something could have shifted, which eventually will lead to the end of days. And this was where the Voldemort apocalypse came in. So I invented, I suppose, this rural location based on the moorlands that are actually not that far from where I live at the minute. I called it Wildemore. So it's a community of people, a little town, collection of villages, separated away miles from main cities, and that nobody really knows they're there. Nobody knows what they're doing. Anything that happens there is non-consequential until in their history, about 300 years prior, almost like a cult of disgruntled priests who are exiled from their positions and exiled from Wildemore because of their shunning. They would not accept the new religion, the new ways of worship that were being enforced on them. So one of them promised he was going to wreak havoc essentially on the people that shunned him. So they turned to the dark side. Sounds a bit like Star Wars now. Turns to the dark side, and he summons a demon that he feels is going to bring the end of days and mean that he can reclaim ownership almost of the land that's been taken from him. Unbeknownst to him, that this rumbles on over sort of 350 years until the point of 2012, where there are demonic things happening. There are shadow creatures rising from pretty much from under the ground, and people are going missing. People are dying, and there's a few central characters there that have their role in that. Unbeknownst to them, they are connected to the original events that happened 350 years ago. And it kind of just, plays out from there. And towards the end, you get to see what these end of days look like and probably why we never heard of it. So not saying that this is complete fiction. To me, it is, but you never know. Something like this could have happened. Strange things do happen, but it's really that it's my kind of telling on, okay, this is one of the possibilities that may have occurred if you believe in this kind of thing,
because Mr. Chris crafted those trilogy book through that idea. So Mr. Chris, can you summarize to us your trilogy books?
Yeah, sure. So the parts themselves, you'll find part 1's called Acolyte, part 2 is The Sowing Season, and part 3 is Of Gods and Insects. It's a story, just like I've mentioned there. So there's 2 parts of the story really. There's the current day events sort of told between sort of 2002 to 2012, and then you've got the original events from the late 1600s. In the first 2 books, I tell the story by intertwining those timelines. So I'm sort of laying the events out that are happening in Wildemore current day, or as it was back then, current day, but then almost giving a bit of narrative and the backstory alongside it as to why certain things have happened and events that have led to what's going to happen in 2012. Book 3 is more kind of based just in the present day. It focuses on the last few days of Wildemore before this apocalypse was to be unleashed. So yeah, it's more so than Steve Alten's ones. It's probably less science fiction. It is definitely more horror, drawing on every probably horror influence that I could find, particularly the writing of James Herbert, like we've discussed before. So if you do like, dark, chilling, supernatural, paranormal, apocalyptic reads, hopefully they'll be the kind of thing you're looking for. Fingers crossed.
Yes. So where do people buy your books, Mr. Chris?
You can find them all on Amazon. Or say find them all. You can find the ones that are available are all on Amazon. As far as I'm aware, across the world, they're out there in Kindle form. I am just trying to get back to releasing them in paperback, but they're definitely all out there in Kindle form for anyone who wants quick access to them. Part 3 of Gods and Insects is still yet to be re-released, but I am working on that. But you can find Acolyte and Sowing Season. You can also find my other more sort of anthology-based horror book, A Necessary End, is available in Kindle and audiobook form. And also a couple of children's books as well. So It's a Long Way to the Moon and It's a Long Night for Santa. You can find those on Amazon as well. And Kindle versions, and It's a Long Way to the Moon is also out there as an audiobook. So I definitely giving everyone options.
Yes, and highly recommended the audiobook, people. It's one of a kind. It will haunt you with the rest of your life.
It will, absolutely.
And it's really delicious and really black.
That's what I aim for. But yeah, I mean, I guess my aim as a writer one day is to have something. I want to write something which is more in the vein, I suppose, of some Steve Alten. Is a bit less of the horror, but a bit more of the the kind of paranormal stuff. I've got one in the works, which, if I ever get it finished, is probably the closest thing that I could match to something that Steve Alten has done. So one day, hopefully, that'll be out there.
So do you think in the future you can do 8 series, Mr. Chris?
8-book series? I don't know. I even though I have this, like I said, this ability to not be able to know when to finish a story, which is how trilogies happen for me. I don't know if I would have the staying power or the imagination to go to like an 8-book series like he's done. I mean, you've got to have so much. You've got to know your universe inside out, I think, and know where you can pull new twists and turns, new characters, new scenarios from. My attention span, I think, would give out, and I'd probably feel like I got to turn my attention to something else before that point. But all credit to anyone that can keep a series like that going, because you get readers who are very loyal to these series, but like I am, and they will always buy the next one because they will still want to live that story. So no, probably beyond my means, but you never know.
Yes.
I'm on my hands.
Yes, and really, Mr. Alten is a prolific writer that we need to support, because the books are really one of a kind. The Luck series, you have a Luck in 2005, Vostok in 2015, and the Luck Heaven's Lake in 2019.
Again, the Luck Heaven's Lake, he's teasing us with it. It's delayed. He hasn't released it yet. I have my order for this one.
Yeah.
I bought I've got one of my prized possessions actually is I've got a signed copy, first edition of the Luck, and I put my name down already. I've ordered the same again for the Luck Heaven's Lake, and I'm eagerly awaiting that one. Again, this is one writer you can forgive for having to take longer, because it's going to be worth it. There's a reason why. He's not going to release something ahead of time that's going to be inferior. So, if it's taken that long for him to be happy with it, we will be. So
yes, definitely, it's something good.
It is.
If it takes time, so like 10 years, 5 years, probably.
Hey, who cares? Who cares? As long as we get it, yeah. As long as we get it.
Yes, it's something that you need to read because it's different, big, and bolder. As a fan of Mr. Alten, if you describe his writing, what is it?
Again, I've used the word already. It is immersive. It is. You really do live through his books, because he does base them. Again, it's very easy to get a feel for the places and the characters he's writing about, because they're very much real people in real situations. The big things that happen in his books are the ones that really bend your mind, because like I said, it's stuff that it doesn't seem to write about everyday stuff. These are things which are myths or historical things, or something that is unexplained. I think he definitely likes to corner those things which you can't box it up and explain it. It's debates which are still going on. So thought-provoking for sure. I doubt you would come away from any of his books and not want to think more on what you've read about and form your own opinions on it. The Meg series is I still haven't completed it, but I enrolled on a cryptozoology sort of home learning course because I wanted to find out more about these type of creatures. The Loch Ness monster, the the Yeti, the abominable snowman, those kind of things. Things about. They're part of our culture, but nobody can explain them. And that's what's wonderful about his work is it really is. Yeah, they will make you think, and as well as being, they are pacey. There's always action in his stories, probably from page one a lot of the time. They do leave you wanting more. Imaginative, to be able to. A lot of people have, you can write stories about killer sharks, but how many are out there? More so now because of him, but how many are out there successfully telling stories about prehistoric sharks living in modern day? It's almost like he's got in a time machine and he's gone somewhere to find out what would happen. And these books are just literally his journal or something. The detail he's gone through in them is immense.
So if you compare Mr. Stephen to a science fiction author, to whom you will be compared?
I have no idea. That's my honest answer, because I've not read a lot of science fiction. I mean, his stuff is probably the most what some would class as science fiction that I've ever read. So I can't really answer that one, to be fair. It's definitely a question I'll put out there for anyone who is an avid reader of science fiction. You know, how it compares. I suppose for my uneducated eyes and ears, what my preconception of science fiction is stories that take place on distant planets, on spaceships and whatever. You don't get that with these. He's taken, again, myths, I suppose, is the best way to describe them, and he's been able to explain them in a modern everyday context. That's, if I ever go science fiction way, that's probably what the ones I would like to read. I need to have an element of realism in there. I can't go off to a far distant world and get, I just can't get as immersed in it as I can the world in which I already know, if that makes any sense. So it's probably that. I think he's kind of skirts on the edge of science fiction, I would say, rather than sort of fully immersing in the whole, galaxy, Star Wars and things like that everyone would expect from science fiction.
So before we go on, Mr. Chris, I want to invite our listeners on Book 101 to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, on our 3rd season, with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one 5-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do check out Food 101. So, Mr. Chris, in general conclusion of Mr. Steve Alten.
Wow, he's definitely, you've used the phrase already, one of a kind. I haven't come across the writer that is quite like him, that will delve into these kind of topics and question. I guess you could say he's questioning. All of his books are questioning, common thought on certain things, and he does seem to like conspiracy theories and put his own spin on them. So yeah, I mean, intelligent. I'd go as far as to say he's a genius, really, in what he's doing. But if you're after books that will capture your imagination and just pull you in and not let you out of the pages of the book and the world you're reading about, you definitely pick up his books. And any of them. The fact that he's got a few series that he's been so richly diverse in, I suppose, is a testament to his talent, because going from prehistoric creatures to the Mayan trilogy and all these others that he's written on the side. It's almost like he knows what he wants to write about, but there's so much that he's able to actually turn his hand to any of it, and it's admirable, to say the least.
Let's support Mr. Steve Robert Alten, because he contributed lots of books in terms of science fiction that make you wonder, make you fascinated, and something that lingered to your mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mr. Chris, thank you for your time.
No problem. More to come, people.
See you soon.